Today, President Trump's campaign chair, Paul Manafort, agreed to cooperate fully, truthfully, completely, and forthrightly with the government and other law enforcement authorities identified by the government in any and all matters as to which the government deems the cooperation relevant. In case there's any doubt about how much he needs to cooperate here. In the run-up to this big news today, there was a lot of fuzzy reporting about how maybe Manafort was going to try to get a carve-out that would let him cut a deal to talk about everything under the sun except President Trump. But nope, there it is in black and white, in any and all matters. If special counsel Robert Mueller wants Manafort to talk about Trump, Manafort is now definitely on the hook to do that. That was not lost on the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. This is from Congressman Adam Schiff today in response to this news. Quote, Manafort's cooperation agreement is broad and requires him to provide complete and truthful information in any and all matters which the government deems relevant. He would be wise to do so, as Mueller's team has already shown that it will not tolerate obstruction of justice. Joining us now is Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
So you raised the prospect of obstruction of justice right away today in response to this guilty plea and this cooperation agreement. In what way is that a concern to you right now?
Well, I raised that for a couple of reasons. First, Manafort tried to essentially suborn perjury of other witnesses. He tried to witness tamper, and he today pled guilty to conspiring to do that, to obstruct justice by tampering with witnesses. And what he learned from that is Bob Mueller's team is pretty damn good. And he got caught, and he paid a big penalty for that in his guilty plea today. So he knows, I think, that if he is less than truthful and less than complete, and Bob Mueller finds out about it, he's going to pay a big price. As Dan Goldman was saying, he had to admit not only to the universe of charges in that courthouse, but also to the 10 charges that the jury hung on, which means that if his cooperation turns out to be less than completely truthful, that not only can he be tried on those 10 counts, but his admissions can be introduced. Basically, it's the nail in the coffin. There won't be another hung jury on those 10 counts. So I think he ought to have gotten the message loud and clear. But also, if he has information pertinent to whether the president is obstructing justice, Mueller's going to want to hear that. And also, I think we have to be concerned with the prospect you mentioned, which is the president might choose to obstruct justice and try to take away any incentive that Manafort has to cooperate by pardoning him. And if he were to do that, then in terms of this cooperation agreement and all the rest of that, that really goes away. The case goes away. There's no repercussion for a lack of cooperation if Manafort gets pardoned. So I don't think we're beyond that possibility.
If the president did issue that kind of a pardon for Mr. Manafort, I think about the politics of this. And I think about accountability for the president. I think about his susceptibility to potential impeachment. Paul Manafort is not somebody who has been a rallying cry among the president's supporters, even his most rabid supporters in the conservative media and on Capitol Hill. Nobody is saying that Paul Manafort was the real hero here and he's been railroaded and everything that he did was fine. And this is a witch hunt where Paul Manafort, this innocent guy, got caught up in it. There hasn't been that kind of a charge on the right, at least yet. If the president did pardon him, and it looked transparently like the president was pardoning him to stop Manafort from giving the special counsel evidence and testimony that might implicate the president in crimes. Do you think it's possible that Congress might look upon that as something that should be investigated as a potential high crime and misdemeanor, that they would want to hold him accountable for that there would be hearings?
Well, I certainly think that Bob Mueller would consider it another big piece of evidence that the president is obstructing justice, and it becomes part of the report that Mueller likely presents to the Department of Justice and Rod Rosenstein that gets presented to Congress. So it would be yet another strong fact in favor of the president being held accountable for obstruction of justice. And I think that if he goes down this road, it won't be, as you say, because there's this rallying cry among his base to help poor Paul Manafort, but rather because the president is motivated, as he always is, by naked self-interest. Remember, Manafort was part of a joint defense agreement, may still be part of a joint defense agreement with the Trump team. That means for the last months or a year, he's been sharing information. The defense team presumably knows much of what he has to say. Now, they have to worry about what he has not told them, but they may have tried to align their stories in terms of the meeting at Trump Tower. So they may be aware of things that Paul Manafort has to say that could really incriminate the president. That would be the number one reason the president might pardon him. The last thing I'll mention, Rachel, which I think is very significant, and if Manafort does cooperate, could be enormously helpful to Mueller, and that is at the same time, the Russians are reaching out to the campaign in that Trump Tower meeting and offering the Trump campaign help, dirt on Hillary Clinton. Manafort is reaching out in the other direction to the Kremlin through people like Oleg Deripaska, offering the Kremlin help, information about the Trump campaign in exchange for money he thinks he's owed from Ukraine. So I would like to know, I think Bob Mueller would like to know, I think the country would like to know what happened at that cross-section where the campaign is reaching out to the Russians reaching out to the campaign chairman is in a pivotal place to tell us what happened to all of those communications before, during, and after the Trump Tower meeting, before, during, and after those emails running back and forth where he's trying to be made whole for his work for Deripaska.
Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you being here tonight. What Congressman Schiff is talking about there in terms of the joint defense agreement, you know, it's interesting. It was only Tuesday this week when Bob Woodward's book came out, where we had this first claim in print that there was a joint defense agreement that involved the president. And according to the book, 37 different witnesses who have been called by Mueller in the Russia investigation. Since then, we've been hard at work trying to figure out who those 37 people might be. We've had lots of denials from lots of people who we know are potential witnesses in the Mueller investigation that, no, I'm not part of that agreement. The president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says that Paul Manafort actually was part of that joint defense agreement. That means that Manafort's lawyers and the president's lawyers have been speaking together in recent months. How that might affect negotiations over a pardon, the dangling of a pardon, and how that might affect strategy going forward with Manafort's now required testimony could go any number of directions. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. We're also in our usual groove of expecting more breaking and developing news over the course of the evening. That's in part because of a big story that was broken late tonight by the Wall Street Journal. And this story, here's the headline. This story that the Wall Street Journal has broken tonight is something that all the legal experts are now telling us we should have probably expected. Maybe that's true. Maybe we all just should have guessed that this was coming or that this had been happening behind the scenes. But it doesn't feel like it. For those of us who've been watching this presidency of late and have been watching the scandal that envelops this presidency more and more on a daily basis, this news tonight, broken by the Wall Street Journal, it does feel like a surprise. Right, you see the headline there, goes right to the heart of the matter. Manafort sought deal in next trial. That means Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort sought a deal with Robert Mueller, with the prosecutors at the special counsel's office who are about to put him on trial for another round of felony charges in federal court. But, quote, talks broke down. To understand why, at least to the non-lawyers among us, this is such a jarring headline tonight, you just stand back for a second and look at the big picture in terms of the legal trouble and the legal investigations that are circling this president and his family and his business and his charity and his campaign right now, right? The biggest news of the past week was, of course, the president's longtime lawyer pleading guilty on 8 federal felony charges. In his plea out loud in court and in the criminal information that was filed by prosecutors in conjunction with his guilty plea, Trump lawyer Michael Cohen not only admitted himself to committing 8 felonies, he implicated the president himself in 2 of those felonies, saying the president had directed him to commit those crimes. Cohen's plea deal also implicated the president's business, the Trump Organization, including 2 specified employees, Executive 1 and Executive 2 at the president's business. Cohen also implicated another business called American Media, which is the publisher of the National Enquirer tabloid, among other publications. Cohen's plea also implicated people from the president's campaign. Cohen's court appearance last week and documents prosecutors filed in conjunction with that plea, therefore appeared to be a sort of roadmap indicating other potential indictments in the future, or at least pointing to other co-conspirators in these felonies to which Michael Cohen pled guilty, right? Which related to him using illicit payments to illegally influence the presidential election. Now, are there going to be further prosecutions of the people who are implicated in Cohen's plea deal? We don't know. Will these allegations of other conspirators participating with him in his crimes, will that lead to further investigation, which may lead to other criminal cases? We don't know. But late last week, we did get word that the district attorney in New York is, quote, considering pursuing criminal charges against the Trump Organization, which is the president's business, and 2 senior company officials in connection with the criminal acts to which Cohen pled in federal court last week. The news also simultaneously broke that the New York State Attorney General has already sought a criminal referral under state law for New York state tax charges, in addition to the federal tax charges that Michael Cohen has already pled to. That same New York State Attorney General has already brought a lawsuit against the Trump Foundation, the president's charity. The president's foundation, the president himself, and the president's 3 eldest children, Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, are all named as defendants in that case from New York State. New York State Attorney General Barbara Underwood has already referred that case against the Trump Foundation to the Public Integrity Division at the U.S. Justice Department, to the Federal Election Commission, and to the IRS for possible federal prosecution. Federal prosecutors also recently brought a huge civil tax case against Ivanka Trump's business partner from what used to be her luxury jewelry brand. Trump Organization executive Allen Weisselberg appears to have worked with prosecutors in the federal case that relates to Michael Cohen and on that New York State case that relates to the Trump Foundation. Reports of Allen Weisselberg's cooperation and possible immunity deal with prosecutors. At this point, those reports are intriguing. They're a little bit hard to sort out. It's fair, I think, to say that we don't yet know how much Trump Organization executive Allen Weisselberg might be talking to prosecutors, how much he's cooperating, whether his immunity deal with them frees him up to talk with prosecutors without fear of being prosecuted himself, just specifically about stuff related to Michael Cohen, or whether Weisselberg's deal also gives him immunity from prosecution on other things related to the president's business interests. But I mean, like that's all happening simultaneously right now, right? All of those things all at once. And that's not even getting into like the emoluments cases, which could result in the production of Trump's tax returns and all of his business records. And all, I mean, if the president, his family, his business interests, his campaign have anything to worry about in terms of past criminal behavior, particularly when it comes to financial crimes, right? Potential campaign finance violations, tax fraud, illicit interactions with Russia that relate ultimately to Russia's interference in the election to benefit Trump. If they've got anything to worry about on any of those fronts, you might imagine that all of these related ongoing investigations might start to feel a little constraining to the president. Right? They might start to seem a little worrying. There's no shortage of legal jeopardy right now for the president, for his family, for the people and entities that are important to him. And honestly, I mean, I don't say that lightly. It is hard to know where the limits of legal jeopardy here might be, not just for the president and his family, but for the entities that are closest to him. And I just want to single out one line here, because I don't think this has had a lot of attention, but it sort of stuck with me over the weekend. And the more I talk to people about it, the more, especially the more I talk to people sort of in the legal system about it, the more this sticks out for me. There is literally a line in the Michael Cohen plea agreement from last week where federal prosecutors spell out that Michael Cohen pleading guilty in federal court last week means that federal prosecutors agree to not further prosecute him for the crimes that he admitted to in court last week. But prosecutors explicitly spell out in the plea agreement with him that they are reserving the right to cite those same felonies as predicate crimes in case they ever want to bring a RICO case in the future on this matter. RICO, that 18 U.S. Code, Section 1961, right? That's racketeering. That's RICO, as in organized crime. Federal prosecutors are reserving the right to charge something here as an organized criminal entity under the RICO statutes, and that relates to Michael Cohen. What? Right. That alone is probably enough to light a little bit of a fire under anybody who believes they might personally end up in the crosshairs of one or more of these now ongoing investigations. But amid all of these different cases and all of these different potential avenues for legal jeopardy for the president and his family and his business and even his charity, even amid all of that, the Paul Manafort case really does stand out. It really does stand alone, right? Michael Flynn, the president's national security advisor, pled guilty. Rick Gates, president's deputy campaign chair, organizer of Trump's inauguration, he's pled guilty. George Papadopoulos, campaign foreign policy advisor, has pled guilty. Even freaking Alex van der Zwaan, random foreign lawyer, pled guilty, right? Paul Manafort has not pled guilty. He stands alone here, and things are now happening to him fast. Of course, the same day Michael Cohen pled guilty in federal court, almost exactly simultaneously to Michael Cohen standing up and pleading guilty to those 8 felonies, Paul Manafort was convicted of 8 felonies by a jury in the Eastern District of Virginia. The day after tomorrow, Wednesday of this week, the prosecutors who convicted Manafort on those 8 felonies, they're going to have to tell the court whether they are going to bring Manafort back to court to retry him on the 10 felony charges for which the jury was not able to reach a verdict. Remember, it was 8 felonies, conviction, 8 felonies, hung jury. Couldn't come to consensus. The foreperson of the jury went out of his or her way to make it publicly known on the verdict sheet that on those 10 charges where they couldn't come to a verdict, 11 of the 12 jurors wanted to convict Manafort on all of them. Only one holdout for the 10 charges on which they didn't get guilty verdicts. Prosecutors know that, and they have the right to put Paul Manafort on trial again for the 10 charges where they got a mistrial, where they were just one juror away from a conviction. We're going to find out the day after tomorrow whether they are going to try Manafort again on those 10 charges. At the same time, prosecutors in the special counsel's office are considering that. They are also steaming toward the start of the next federal felony trial for Manafort. It's interesting. Just a few days ago, the federal court in D.C. that's about to start the second trial for Manafort, they unsealed some of the earlier proceedings that we, the public, hadn't previously had access to in Manafort's D.C. case. That let us see for the first time that even the judge who's overseeing the next Paul Manafort trial, the one in D.C., that judge appears to be mystified by the fact that Manafort didn't consent to all the charges against him just being consolidated in one jurisdiction so he could just go on trial once. The reason Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign chair, the reason he had a trial that ended last week, and he's now about to have a new trial that's starting within the next few weeks, is simply because he decided he wanted 2 trials. The government gave him the choice to consolidate them and only go on trial once. He chose to go on trial twice in these 2 neighboring jurisdictions. Why did he make that choice? We don't know, and neither does the judge in his case. This is from the newly unsealed court transcript in Manafort's case from February 14th in Washington, D.C. This is the judge in Manafort's D.C. case talking to Manafort's defense lawyers. And before this was just unsealed, this had been a sealed proceeding at the bench. Now we know what happened. The judge says in this newly unsealed discussion, quote, "I understand you're hamstrung. Is there any change in Mr. Manafort's point of view about the Eastern District versus the District of Columbia? I think the only thing I can imagine that's more unusual than the government offering you that choice is the choice you're making. But is there any further discussion about that?" Manafort's defense lawyer, Mr. Downing, says no. And then the judge says, "Okay, all right." The judge is saying, are you sure you want your client to go on trial twice? You want 2 federal felony trials? The judge is saying to the defense lawyers, listen, prosecutors never give anybody the option to drop one of their trials. They're giving you the option to drop one of the trials and just go on trial once. You sure you're not willing to take them up on it? The defense lawyer is like, yep, Your Honor, we're sticking with the plan. 2 trials. The judge is like, okay, it's your funeral. Here we go. And so this second trial is about to start, and it's weird. And it's going to happen before this judge who finds it remarkable, in the judge's words, unusual, that Manafort has decided to have a second trial. Incidentally, this judge who's going to be presiding in the D.C. trial is the same judge who ordered Paul Manafort held in jail instead of on house arrest because of allegations that he was tampering with witnesses in his case while he was out on bail. So this next case for Manafort is not promising for a lot of reasons, but it's also going to be significantly different from the case in Virginia where he just got convicted on 8 felonies. We know that in part from the list of more than 1,500 pieces of evidence that the prosecution has now filed for the D.C. case against Manafort. Now, one of the things that's different about this next case for Manafort compared to the last one is that at least some of the evidence in this case that they're going to be citing is apparently in Russian. Look, at least the subject lines of all of these emails that appear on the prosecution's evidence list are written in Cyrillic. This is also the trial where Manafort has a co-defendant on some of the charges. His co-defendant is Konstantin Kilimnik, longtime business associate of Manafort's, who is Russian, who the special counsel's office has said in open court is believed to be associated with Russian intelligence. Kilimnik is also believed to be hiding in Russia right now rather than face these charges alongside Paul Manafort. In addition to being listed as Manafort's co-defendant in the D.C. case, Kilimnik also appears here, we believe, in the evidence list, evidence item number 1194. KK, we believe, is the nickname for Konstantin Kilimnik, and that's the way Manafort referred to him in his consulting business. In the evidence list against Manafort for the D.C. trial, there are also these couple of references, who we believe may be to a Russian oligarch who's known to be very close to Vladimir Putin and who's known to have had extensive business dealings with Manafort. His name is Oleg Deripaska. He appears in at least, we think this is references to him in these emails that are described in the evidence list that prosecutors have submitted. We're going to have more on Deripaska's role in the next Manafort trial coming up in just a moment tonight. But, you know, this next Manafort trial was always going to be a difficult prospect for him, right? You don't have the wind at your back when you're coming off 8 convictions, 8 felony federal convictions right before you start a new trial on 7 more federal felony counts. In terms of the president's legal jeopardy, though, this second Manafort trial has got a lot of Russian stuff in it. It's a lot closer to the original concerns related to Russia that started the special counsel's investigation in the first place. After initial reports last week, stoked in part by the president himself, that he might be considering a pardon for Paul Manafort following his conviction in Virginia, tonight Gabriel Sherman reports at VanityFair.com that the president is so committed to the idea of pardoning Paul Manafort now that he's willing to do it even over the objections of his White House counsel, Don McGahn. Quote, Trump has told people he's considering bringing in a new lawyer to draft a Manafort pardon if McGahn won't do it. Well, in that context, tonight, Wall Street Journal breaks the news that Manafort was trying to do a deal. Manafort, the guy who would not flip. Manafort, the guy who's going all the way to trial not once but twice. The one guy implicated in the Trump-Russia scandal who absolutely would not do a deal with prosecutors and was praised by the president for that. Manafort has apparently been trying to do a deal with prosecutors. According to Aruna Viswanathan at the Wall Street Journal tonight, Manafort's defense team started conversations with Mueller's prosecutors about a potential plea deal while the Virginia jury was deliberating over Manafort's fate in his first trial. Quote, Paul Manafort's defense team held talks with prosecutors to resolve a second set of charges against the former Trump campaign chair. The plea discussions occurred as a Virginia jury was spending 4 days deliberating tax and bank fraud charges against Manafort. The talks between Manafort's defense team and prosecutors in the special counsel's office were aimed at forestalling a second related trial for Manafort, which is scheduled to begin on September 17th. But the Journal also reports that although Paul Manafort and his defense team started those talks with the prosecutors in the special counsel's office, the talks did not result ultimately in a deal. And this is where it gets very intriguing. Quote, the plea talks on the second set of charges stalled over issues raised by special counsel Robert Mueller. What issues? Quote, it isn't clear what those issues were, and the proposed terms of the would-be plea deal could not immediately be determined. As the president openly mulls the prospect of pardoning Paul Manafort to try to get himself out of this corner of this giant legal mess he's now in. This new reporting at the Wall Street Journal tonight, does this mean that Paul Manafort was offering to cooperate with prosecutors for the first time ever? Could this mean that he wasn't offering to cooperate, but his defense team was nevertheless trying to make his second trial go away? If they weren't offering his cooperation in exchange for making those charges go away, what else would they have to offer? There's ways to figure out the answers to these questions. We're going to take our best shot at it next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
I just said we were going to have Michael Beschloss here. I mean that, but we have a little bit of breaking news first. We just got this new filing that is news that actually fits exactly what we've been talking about, but this is brand new. This is a new filing from Robert Mueller's office, from the special counsel's office tonight in the Paul Manafort case. It was 9 weeks ago, I think 9 weeks ago tomorrow, that the Trump campaign chair, Paul Manafort, pled guilty and agreed to start cooperating with prosecutors from Mueller's office. We had been expecting Mueller's team and Manafort's lawyers to file tomorrow a joint status report to the court, updating the judge in Manafort's case on basically how it's going with Manafort cooperating, when prosecutors might be done with him cooperating, when they're willing to essentially hand him over to the judge so the judge can move on to sentencing him for his crimes. And again, that joint status report was due tomorrow, but they have just filed early tonight. And here's the part that makes the ominous music start up in your head and that makes us put the red banner on the bottom of the screen. In this new report they just filed, Mueller's prosecutors have just asked the judge to please give them 10 days before they tell the judge what's up with Manafort's case right now. 10 days? That is very strange. They say they're not going to meet tomorrow's deadline. They would like a 10-day extension. That is unusual. Here's exactly how they say it. Quote, at the hearing on September 14th, 2018, the court ordered the parties to submit a joint status report on November 16th, 2018, which would be tomorrow. The parties have been meeting since the hearing date. The parties believe a brief extension of the status report date until November 26th, 2018, will allow them to provide the court with a report that will be of great assistance in the court's management of this matter. Actually, it's greater assistance, not great assistance. That will be of greater assistance in the court's management of this matter. Paul Manafort has been cooperating with Mueller's team for the last 9 weeks. What's going to happen in the next 10 days that will give the court a better picture of how helpful Paul Manafort has been? Something's going to happen between now and 10 days from now that will allow them to be of greater assistance in the court's management of this matter? What's going to happen in the next 10 days? There is a palpable sense right now, with the president firing the attorney general hours after the election, bragging today that he did that because of his own objections to the Mueller investigation. The president bragging today that since he installed his own new guy at the Justice Department, replacing the attorney general, he has new inside information on the inner workings of Mueller's probe. With the president meeting for hours with his Russia lawyers day after day this week and canceling many other major events in order to make time for that, with sealed proceedings related to the special counsel's office unfolding in a D.C. courtroom, with mysterious extensions like this one tonight for cooperators like Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, who ran the Trump campaign. There is a palpable sense right now that this is the time we have been expecting. This is the thing for which we have been all reading up on our history. NBC presidential historian Michael Beschloss is on deck right when we need him. That's next. When the president's campaign chair pled guilty to multiple felonies, one of the things in his plea agreement was a specific deal with Robert Mueller and the special counsel's office that they would wait to decide. They'd wait to see how much cooperation they got from Manafort. And then only after that would they decide if Paul Manafort was going to be retried, prosecuted again for the 10 felony charges on which the jury, in Manafort's case, couldn't reach a verdict. That kind of a deal makes sense for the prosecutors, right? You know, cooperate for real, man. Give us everything you've got for real. Come totally clean. If you don't, we can always prosecute you again on 10 more felonies. Do you want that? Right? That's exactly the kind of leverage prosecutors would love to have when dealing with a cooperator, right? That's the deal they signed with Paul Manafort. Well, today, curveball. because the judge from the Manafort case, the case where there were these 10 outstanding charges where the jury couldn't agree, that judge today decided he's not going along with that deal in the plea agreement. Surprise. He today told prosecutors in the special counsel's office, basically, hey, you guys got to charge Manafort with those 10 felony counts now. You're going to retry him now, or cut bait and say you're not going to retry him on those at all. You got to do it now. Make that decision now. I'm not waiting until you're done with his cooperation. Now, there are a bunch of reasons why this might have happened. You might remember this is the kind of cranky judge from the Eastern District of Virginia, the one who seemed like he really had it out for Mueller and the prosecutors in the special counsel's office during the trial. Maybe it has something to do with that. We were told by people familiar with this particular federal court, though, that a more likely explanation is that this is the rocket docket of the Eastern District of Virginia, where they really like to go fast. So regardless of the specific contours of this case or any specific crabbiness by this judge, they just don't like to wait. They don't want to wait to sentence someone who's been convicted in that district, even if there's good reason to wait, because that guy is still cooperating with prosecutors. So we don't know exactly why it happened. But the bottom line here is that you need to put this on your calendar for the end of next week. The judge has now ordered a hearing for a week from tomorrow. You are going to care about what happens at that hearing, because depending on how exactly this all shakes out, that hearing may give us, the public, an unprecedented window into one of the most intriguing unanswered questions in this whole saga, which is, what does the president's campaign chairman know? What does Manafort know? Since Manafort decided to start cooperating with prosecutors, has that given Mueller any new real dirt on anyone else? Like, I don't know, president? This judge now is pushing Paul Manafort's sentencing decision to happen now. It's after Manafort started cooperating, but it's definitely before he is done. In the course of trying to push forward Manafort's sentencing, this judge may force Robert Mueller and Mueller's prosecutors to tell the court whether Manafort's cooperation thus far has helped the special counsel's office investigate or prosecute anybody else other than Paul Manafort for any other crime. And that, of course, has been the $62 gazillion question all along, with the president's campaign chairman flipping. Who might he flip on? What might he know? What has he told prosecutors? What are they doing with that information? Unexpectedly, because of this surprise order from this Virginia judge today, we might get an answer to that question very, very soon. Stay with us. In the 70s, it was sideburns and wide lapels with Gerald Ford. By the 80s, he had dialed back the lapels a little bit and the sideburns for this Reagan George H.W. Bush club sandwich. By the 90s, Paul Manafort had settled on sort of a signature look. Romney hairdo with a part with Vince Wilfork shoulder pads. He liked that look so much, he even gave that patented Paul Manafort look to his client at the time, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. He gave him an extreme makeover in his own image. Twinsies. Even during his federal trial in Virginia this summer, before he was convicted on 8 felony charges, Paul Manafort was dressed to the nines every day in court, really nice suits. The reason he was allowed to wear those nice suits at his trial is because courts allow defendants to wear street clothes when they're on trial. So their appearance in a Department of Corrections jumpsuit doesn't end up improperly swaying the jury by making them look guilty. You have the presumption of innocence, and you get to look innocent, too, by looking like a guy on the street. In Paul Manafort's case, that's a guy in an ad for an expensive suit. Hold on to that mental picture of Manafort, though, because it's sort of the end of an era now. Tomorrow, Paul Manafort, the president's campaign chairman, will be due back in court. Earlier this week, in anticipation of tomorrow's hearing, Manafort's lawyers asked the judge if Manafort could please wear a suit. Could he please wear street clothes, just like he did during the trial? Yesterday, the judge, the federal judge who presided over Manafort's trial and who will preside over tomorrow's hearing, he ruled no. Quote, defendants who are in custody post-conviction are, as a matter of course, not entitled to appear for sentencing or any other hearing in street clothing. Quote, this defendant should be treated no differently from other defendants. So Judge Ellis denies Paul Manafort's request to wear a suit tomorrow. He'll be in his jumpsuit. his green prison jumpsuit. The reason he's going to be in court tomorrow overall is because the judge wants to know whether the special counsel's office plans to retry Manafort on the 10 felony counts that the jury had deadlocked on in his earlier trial. The judge wants an answer from the prosecutors soon, even though the Mueller team isn't done getting information out of Paul Manafort now that he has a cooperation deal with them. So this week, the special counsel's office said in a filing that if they do have to make a decision now, quote, the government does not oppose the dismissal of those 10 counts without prejudice, which means they don't want to make a decision now about whether they're going to try Paul Manafort on those 10 counts. They want to wait to see what else they can get out of him as a cooperator. But if the judge is going to force them to make a decision now, okay, they'll let him off the hook for those 10 felony counts, at least for now. But they want the right to bring up those counts again and retry them again if they decide to down the road. Now, remember, this federal judge that we're talking about is the guy who sort of puts the crank in Cranky. He's the one who was really pushy toward the prosecutors all throughout the trial. That's the judge who the prosecutors and Paul Manafort will be back in front of tomorrow. So anything could happen. Watch this space. Last night, I scared the dog. When I got the news on my phone that the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, had his plea deal yanked, prosecutors in the special counsel's office said he repeatedly lied to them after he pled guilty and supposedly started cooperating. I was at home because I had the night off. I was on the couch with the dog. I sort of, this is what I do in my time off, sort of idly checked the court docket, saw the filing. I yelped. Scared the dog in a way that stuck. He jumped off the couch. He would not talk to me for the whole rest of the night until breakfast time this morning. Then this morning, we woke up to this report from the Guardian newspaper, which the dog didn't care about at all. This report that Paul Manafort met with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange on at least 3 occasions at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where Assange lives now. Including a meeting in March 2016, right as Manafort was taking over the Trump campaign. I should note right now that The Guardian is the only outlet which has this story. NBC News has not confirmed it. Paul Manafort tonight is strenuously denying it. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are also denying that any meetings occurred, for whatever that's worth. If it's true, of course, the implications are explosive, right? Assange is the one who released the documents stolen by Russian intelligence to help Trump win the election. If Trump's campaign chair was meeting with him right before he did that, that's really bad in terms of the Trump campaign being shown to have colluded with Russia. That said, as I mentioned, Manafort is strenuously contesting this reporting from The Guardian, saying, quote, this story is totally false and deliberately libelous. I have never met Julian Assange or anyone connected to him. We're now watching for a couple of different things. First of all, Mueller's office says they're going to produce a detailed sentencing submission that will set forth the nature of Manafort's crimes and lies. Who among us is not interested in seeing something like that, even if it does scare the dog? We actually called the judge's chambers in D.C. today to ask when we should expect to see that document from the special counsel's office. We asked if we should expect to see it before or after the judge sets a firm sentencing date for Manafort, which both sides are now asking her to do. We didn't receive a clear answer from the judge's chambers. They just told us to keep an eye on the docket, which we always do. But Mueller clearly says that he intends to release this detailed evidence of Manafort's lies and crimes in a detailed sentencing filing of some kind. So, provided that document is going to be public and not filed under seal, one major question is, why is Mueller planning to do that? Should this be seen as routine for this type of case, to the extent that there is this type of case? Or is Mueller choosing this upcoming court filing essentially as a vehicle to release to the public information about the Russia scandal and Manafort that might not otherwise see the light of day? If, for example, it's otherwise going to be blocked by Trump's new acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker. Could that be a factor here? Is Mueller planning on using these court filings to give the public information about what evidence they have collected and what happened in that presidential election? Also, why was NBC News able to obtain these draft court documents from Mueller's office tonight, showing what appear to be draft charges and a draft plea agreement for a Trump campaign hanger-on named Jerome Corsi? I have never seen a draft indictment made public before. Why was this one made public? And with the New York Times just moments ago breaking the news that that Manafort may have lost his plea agreement because prosecutors found out that once he was supposed to be cooperating with them, he was actually secretly feeding information to the White House about the special counsel's office and their investigation and their lines of inquiry. With all of these stories now breaking all at once, how much reason is there to worry here about this very important national security investigation potentially being messed with? And if it is being messed with, can the Democrats in Congress do anything about it now that they're taking over the House? The soon-to-be chairman of the House Intelligence Committee joins us next. And, the next 24 hours, we're already likely to be a little bit nuts. Sometime tomorrow, we're not sure when, but sometime tomorrow, we are expecting Robert Mueller's office to release a detailed written court filing explaining how Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort has lied to investigators since he pled guilty in September and was supposed to be cooperating with them in their ongoing investigations of the president and his campaign. Remember, the president's legal team has been bragging that Manafort was essentially spying on Mueller's investigation on behalf of Trump and the White House. They have told the press that Manafort was reporting back to Trump and the Trump White House what the special counsel's office was asking him about and what they appeared to know. That's according to the president's legal team. Well, sometime tomorrow, we're going to get the perspective of Mueller and his prosecutors on that matter, which may be fairly intense. Also tomorrow, by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Mueller's prosecutors are facing a deadline to submit to federal court in New York a sentencing document laying out how exactly the president's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, has assisted them in ongoing investigations since he has started cooperating with them and since he himself has pled guilty to felonies. Now, this document that the Mueller team is expected to submit to the judge in Cohen's case tomorrow. This is a document that judge will use in deciding how to sentence Michael Cohen. Cohen's due to be sentenced next week. But tomorrow, Mueller's prosecutors will submit a document to the judge in Cohen's case explaining how helpful he has been as a cooperator. And we expect that document, at least partially, to be publicly facing. So that should also be fairly intense. Also tomorrow, Trump foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos is due to get out of prison after serving his time at the Crowbar Hotel for lying to federal investigators about his contacts with the Russian government during the Trump campaign. Now, I do not anticipate that we're going to get a George Papadopoulos post-release from prison press conference or anything, but I suppose anything is possible. But there are other shoes we're expecting to drop soon, even in addition to those matters that we know are all going to happen tomorrow. The case of Maria Butina, for example. She's charged with being a secret agent of the Russian government, operating in this country to influence the 2016 election and the Republican Party, in part through her involvement in the NRA. Today, the judge in the Butina case convened a phone conference with prosecutors and with Butina's defense team. Almost all of it was conducted under seal at the request of Butina's lawyers. But before they locked the doors and kicked the public and the reporters out, we did learn a few more details that would seem to indicate that the Butina case is heading towards some sort of resolution fairly soon. Whether it's a plea deal or some other kind of ending, we don't know. But today, Maria Butina's lawyers asked the judge to basically cancel the next public hearing that was scheduled for her case. Her lawyers also said that they will likely abandon an earlier effort they'd been pursuing to subpoena documents and records from the university she'd been attending as part of her defense. But then, interestingly, after that court hearing wrapped up today, so some of it happened in public, a whole bunch of it happened under seal, and then it ended. And after it ended today, the judge in Maria Butina's case appointed a new federal criminal defender to join Maria Butina's defense team as, quote, advisory counsel. So I don't know what that means. She's already got lawyers defending her in this case. I don't know why, but the judge just gave her an extra defense lawyer to help out her existing team of lawyers. And I don't know what that means. And we don't know exactly what's happening with the Maria Butina case, but it does seem like it's coming to an end. Prosecutors and her defense team had indicated to the court a few weeks ago that they might be coming to some sort of resolution. Today's proceedings make it seem like that is starting to happen. And this comes, of course, at a time when the Daily Beast has just reported that adjacent to the Maria Butina case, her American maybe boyfriend, a Republican activist named Paul Erickson, he himself has received a target letter from federal prosecutors notifying him that prosecutors are also considering charging him with being an agent of a foreign power. That was reported in the Daily Beast yesterday. So all of these things seem to be sort of wrapping, right, or coming to important benchmark moments. Manafort is going to have a big day tomorrow. Cohen is going to have a big day tomorrow. George Papadopoulos is free tomorrow. The Butina case seems to be wrapping up right now. In addition to that stuff, as we mentioned on last night's show, the AP has reported that prosecutors in the Southern District of New York appear to be moving forward quickly now with something related to the Paul Manafort case, the Paul Manafort illegal lobbying in Ukraine case. And the way they're moving forward with it, it appears to be the part of the Manafort case that may entangle a big famous D.C. law firm and two big D.C. PR firms. Again, federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York now aggressively pursuing that, according to the AP. In addition to that, the New York Times reports today that a different set of federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia, they are also moving ahead now with the case that relates to the Michael Flynn matter. The Times reports today that a senior federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia has impaneled a grand jury and is looking into illegal lobbying associated with the nation of Turkey. And this appears to be some sort of offshoot of the Michael Flynn case. Because it's Friday night. Yeah, yep, more breaking news. The New York Times has just posted this new story. Quote, Trump said to know of hush payment months before he denied it. The Times just posting this now, citing two sources, saying that months before, the president told reporters on Air Force One that he knew nothing about a $130,000 payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. According to the Times' sources, he actually definitely knew about that payment months previously. Joining us now is Barbara McQuade. She's former U.S. attorney in Michigan. Barbara, it's great to have you with us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Rachel.
So yet more breaking news. It's almost like you're a little angel who brings it with you every time we book you. Here's how I feel. I feel like he said, oops, we were all lying. We'll have another story tomorrow about this. This whole lying circus around the Michael Cohen case and this payment, I feel like it's sort of turning out to be exhausting. As you're watching this as a former prosecutor, are you in wait-and-see mode in terms of what counts as important information on this story? Or if the president is proven to have had knowledge about this while he was denying it to the public, will that end up being legally important?
Well, you know, these public statements are not necessarily illegal. I think at some point you hope the American public wants to hold someone accountable who lies to them repeatedly. But the shifting stories, I think, is what matters to a prosecutor, that the story keeps changing, because that suggests some sort of consciousness of guilt, that there's something to be hidden here. Now, maybe it's just the embarrassment of having a relationship with a porn star that is what is being hidden. But when someone changes their story so frequently, that does set off red flags for a prosecutor that there might be something more here than meets the eye.
It seems like what's driving the shifting stories is the pressure of this FBI raid on Michael Cohen and whatever's going on, whatever federal prosecutors are pursuing with regard to Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump and this payment. There's something about this SDNY case which is driving them to at least try to come up with new stories about it. The judge.
Well, I agree. It seems like they're desperate. Yeah, I think you mentioned in recent days, it's like they're on the edge of the cliff and they've got to figure out a strategy. They know this truth is going to come out, and so they need to get in front of it as much as they can.
The judge in the Manafort case in Virginia today raised a very interesting question. He got headlines for some other reasons, for really giving it to the prosecutors in the courtroom. But he basically confronted them. Well, why did you hive off the Michael Cohen case and make that a Southern District of New York locally prosecuted matter? And you're not doing that with Paul Manafort. There's nothing in court and you're in your filings that says this is about the election. Why do this one with the special counsel's office prosecutors and separate that other one off? What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's because there's a reason for that. Because there is a relationship between the Manafort charges and Russian interference with the election. You know, Cohen is someone that I'm sure the Justice Department would like to see flip just as much as Manafort. The judge accused the prosecutors of only charging Manafort because they want him to flip. But the fact that Michael Dreeben said we followed the money, it seems to me that the conduct that's charged both in Virginia and in D.C. against Paul Manafort all arises from that work he did for the government of Ukraine with associates of Russia, political figures associated with Russia, and oligarchs. And so even if they don't have concrete proof that this is about Russian interference with the election, looking at the flow of money is always so important to understand motives and leverage and extortion and blackmail and other things that I think they see it as being inextricably intertwined with the Russia investigation.
Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney Michigan. Thank you, Barb. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Rachel.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Things went a little wobbly for the president's campaign chairman and his deputy campaign chairman today. Both of them, of course, have pled guilty to multiple felonies and are now cooperating with prosecutors from the special counsel's office under Robert Mueller. But that apparently doesn't guarantee smooth sailing now for Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. For one, both of them are still awaiting sentencing. So it has to be weighing on both of them that just yesterday, another dude who has also pled and cooperated, a guy who was on the hook for much less than either Manafort or Gates, he yesterday got sent to federal prison for 6 months. Again, this guy also pled guilty. He also cooperated. Compared to Gates and Manafort, he was an absolute small fry. So him heading off to prison for a pretty good sentence, that alone has to sort of focus the mind, you might imagine, if you are Paul Manafort or Rick Gates. But all of a sudden, in the last 24 hours, we've also had a bunch of news that indicates there are still live issues in both of their cases, separate and apart from how much jail time they're going to get. For Gates, at least, he has the benefit of not being in jail right now. He's at home under relatively strict orders about his ability to move around the country and how frequently he needs to check in with the court. He's also got an ankle bracelet that he keeps on to monitor his whereabouts for the court. Gates has just filed a request, though, to loosen up those terms of his confinement, including losing the ankle bracelet altogether. The good news for Gates is that it looks like he will probably succeed in that request about the ankle bracelet, if only because the special counsel's office isn't opposing that request from him. But Rick Gates isn't negotiating this stuff alone. He, of course, has a legal team who's working on this kind of stuff for him on his behalf. It's stuff about his bail conditions, also, issues related to his ongoing cooperation, his ultimate sentencing. For Rick Gates, that itself, his necessity for continuing legal representation, we now realize that itself may be a real problem for him. We know that because last night in federal court in New York, Rick Gates' old lawyers, his old legal team, just sued him for $369,000 in unpaid legal bills, plus interest, plus expenses. Apparently, before Gates dropped his old legal team, he only paid these guys about $20,000 of the more than $400,000 that they billed him. So now they're suing to get back the rest. And that, of course, is tough on its own terms if you're Rick Gates. But imagine what this means for the new lawyers that he's got working for him now, too, right? These lawyers who are still working for him right now, trying to get his ankle bracelet taken off, trying to loosen his bail terms, trying to set him up for the best possible sentencing. He's got lawyers now who are still working for him all the time, doing stuff for him on behalf of him in this case. How long is that likely to last now that his previous lawyers are having to sue him for hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills? How are the current lawyers going to look upon that? So like I said, things are a little wobbly right now for Trump Deputy Campaign Chairman Rick Gates. But it's way worse for Trump Campaign Chairman Paul Manafort, who honestly would love the luxury right now of fighting to remove his ankle bracelet. That would be a huge step up for him because, of course, he is not at home wearing an ankle bracelet. He still lives in jail. Paul Manafort's cooperation with the special counsel's office, which he's now pledged to do ever since he pled guilty last month, that cooperation proceeds now while Manafort still sits in federal jail in Virginia awaiting sentencing on the charges for which he's been convicted and to which he has pled guilty. Yesterday, the judge in one of his cases formally ordered the forfeiture of all of these properties, all these fancy condos and townhouses and country estates, all once owned by Paul Manafort. As of last night, all of these properties have been officially seized by the U.S. government, which means that you watching me at home right now, you and me too, us U.S. taxpayers, we now officially own an apartment in Trump Tower. Because that's one of the properties that was seized from the president's felon campaign chairman as part of his federal sentencing on multiple criminal charges. What a nice American moment for all of us, right? Mazel tov. What are we going to do with the place? Definitely new drapes. Also, deep cleaning. So last night, Manafort is told formally to forfeit all those multi-million-dollar properties. But then today, a serious curveball was thrown over the plate for Manafort, one that I at least did not see coming. And that's next. Stay with us.